David, thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
Thank you very much for having me. I am fantastic and all good. And it's a Christmas time at 7 Billion Ideas. So looking forward to celebrating later today with our annual Christmas party.
Fantastic. I mean, this will go out sometime in early 2020, so Christmas will be long forgotten. But yes, they'll see it in the video. They'll see your decorations, which will be nice. Will bring us back to that. Anyway, listen. Let me tell me a little bit about you as a youngster. What did you want to do when you were growing up? What were the ambitions?
Well, it's interesting. I remember having a conversation with my my mum when I was about 9 or 10 years old. Mainly, I remember it, but she also replays it back to me quite a lot. That I said to her, "Don't worry, Mum. I'm going to look after you when you when you get old, because I'm going to go into business. I'm going to go into education, and then I'm quite interested about politics." And I remember just saying that. I remember saying business, education, and politics. And in a way, I've been quite lucky that I run an education and innovation company, which is a business, and every day you're dealing with different challenges. So not necessarily politics, but exciting nonetheless.
Fantastic. Well, how lovely. What a lovely thing to say to your mum. That's really nice. Really nice. I like that. So tell me how you ended up working in IBM.
So I remember I've always been very passionate about picking subjects at school, and therefore what I did at university, something that I really enjoyed. I'm dyslexic. I am terrible at spelling. My emails take quite a long time to construct. But as I was making my decision from A levels to going to university, I just loved history. History was my favourite subject at school. And I went to University of Sheffield and I studied history. And then in year 2, year 3, I was doing secret history, which was MI5, MI6. So I was reading a lot about spies, but then I realized that one had to work out what I was going to do with my next chapter. And I always took any opportunity for work experience and chucked myself in the deep end with lots of different part-time jobs. But then I really needed to make a decision. So I did 2 things. I remember making a decision, look, I'm going to go work for a big company. And I went into the library and I printed off the Forbes 100 list, and I just crossed out every company I thought was boring, and industries that I was not interested in. And I won't name those industries, but one which was remaining on the list was technology. And there was a number of big companies. I thought they could be quite interesting. It's a fast-paced industry, lots of change. I won't get bored. I'll try and get into the tech sector. And then it was a case of what should I do in that sector? What would be the most natural roles to look at? And I then I just remember Googling jobs in a business. What does a business look like? What's the structure of a business? And again, I went through the similar exercise of crossing off jobs that I just knew I wouldn't be very good at, which just wasn't in my skill set. And luckily, the sales kind of profession was kind of crying out to me. I always enjoyed dealing with customers and talking to people, and I dug deep into it. So then I looked at the sales specialist roles in IBM in the tech sector and started to apply for those roles. And I remember telling that exact story in my first interview, and everybody kind of laughed at me, but they thought there's a little bit of logic to this guy, to why he's here. It was certainly a different answer to what some of my peers were saying. And then I joined IBM.
That's a great answer. And actually, it also ages you, the fact that you Googled. You see, in my day and age, there wasn't even the internet. So, I mean, we are so generationally apart. It's amazing. So, that's fantastic. I love that. So how can you go then from the safety, the stability of a corporate role? I mean, nearly a decade at IBM. It's a great company, as you said, you chose them. What made you take that leap into the unknown and becoming an entrepreneur?
You know what, I have to say, I absolutely loved my time at IBM. They really looked after the graduate community. Certainly my experience was I had some fantastic people managers in those early years, and I really enjoyed learning about the art of selling, the professional side of it. There's a misconception that it's for those people which kind of the Dell boys of the world and the gifts of the gab. It isn't like that. When you're constructing millions of dollar deals and you've got big boardrooms that you've got to walk into, it's a fascinating experience, and I loved it. And I was pushing on in my career, and I was on the director's path for IBM, and And I just knew there was a little bit of something missing. I remember sitting at a conference and there was about 400 people in the room, and I just was not interested anymore about what was being talked about. I was actually feeling quite claustrophobic. I was like, I need to get out of this room. This wasn't going to be the way that I was going to spend the rest of my life. It's not how I wanted to do it. But I was very lucky at a similar time that we came up with this idea for 7 billion ideas about. It was 2012, so I ended up leaving IBM 2 years later. So those first 2 years, we were really developing the concept, thinking it through, and then I made the decision that it was kind of time to go, and it was a risky one. It was a gamble, but a calculated gamble. We made sure there was enough clients before we did the complete jump, but I wanted to go build something that I was very proud of. So obviously massive sacrifices in terms of financial stability. I started the business. My co-founder was my friend who became my wife as well, Jenny, and we did it at the same time. So most businesses start with one person doing it. We actually did it with two people jumping. And then very early on, we decided to remortgage our house and basically just completely gamble everything that we had ever earned into the business. And we sold it to ourselves. This was how we sold it to ourselves, that this would be a real life MBA. I remember thinking, right, we're going to invest a significant amount of money. If it doesn't work, then at least we have to learn something from this experience. We'd dust ourselves down and go again. I remember speaking to my parents, who felt like, even though I was in my 20s, I remember feeling like I had to get some sort of support from my family, and I just said it to my dad, who's quite quite introverted and kind of risk averse, and he kind of just sort of said, look, you've got to go do it, otherwise you become a very boring old man one day who just talked about an idea all of your life. Give it a shot, and then if it doesn't happen, you can dust yourself down and pick it up. But luckily it's worked out well.
You're very lucky, actually, very lucky to have had that reaction. That's fantastic. And also, I think it's a really good lesson for people when they decide to go into business. Would they put money into themselves? You see a lot of these programs these days with people, pitching their ideas and not willing to take risks themselves with their own money. So I like that. I admire that. But why are you so passionate about ideas? What is it that makes you so excited about ideas?
Well, I guess I was always just commenting on that. I think it's a really important point about risk and rewards. I think when people get investment, they forget it's someone else's money. Someone else has had to earn that money, and you've got a huge amount of responsibility to pay it back. And if quite frankly, you're not prepared to put some skin in the game, then what is that telling you about any potential investors on a crowdfunding platform or angel investors? So you've got to put something in there. But when we started, when the concept was originated, we were literally just talking about different kind of ideas, fun, thoughtful, and creative ideas, all kind of stuff. And it was very common for me and my friends at the time just to do that. And we were kind of the self-proclaimed ideas people. But as the planet's population was passing 7 billion people, and we said, why don't we build a platform, build a business called 7 billion ideas? It was like, we need to go do this. And can we inspire other people to act on them? And I get no greater pleasure, Maria, than hearing people which have done something, they've been inspired by 7 billion ideas. So I kind of see ourselves as being that kind of, that kind of pebble and having that ripple effect, whether or not it's in the education or the corporate space. Can we help not hundreds, but thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people in the years to come to actually do something? Okay, not just talk about ideas, go see if they work, go see if they don't work. And it's very... I guess it was kind of cemented when we started going into schools, and we started inspiring, say, primary school students to come up with their own ideas that could change the world. And when you see the energy and you see the enthusiasm of these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds come forward and share their ideas, we just knew that we were onto something. And it was impossible not to take pleasure from a buzzing 8-year-old sharing their great invention. And we just thought we need to do this and dedicate our lives to it.
So here's a challenge for you, though, because I find myself in later years, as I'm more experienced and I see the world more, I actually find that I have got more ideas than I ever used to have, but I have less time. And how do I know which ideas are the ideas that I should be implementing? How do I know that an idea is a good idea? Is there a formula to say that's when an idea is a good idea?
Yeah, we all have different challenges with time. The one thing that has been the one thing I've learned over the last few years is everybody is busy, brilliantly busy. Time is one of the biggest problems in education and in the corporate sector, but it's the only common currency that we all have. there's different points in anybody's life that you can dedicate to new ideas and new ventures. Some people have more to lose, whether it's a family or a house or a job. I was lucky in a way that it was before being married and having kids. But what I would say to people of all ages, it doesn't really matter who you are. There is time. There is time that we can find, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sitting behind a desk working on a business plan. It can be when you're out running or walking or in the car, and you're just developing ideas there and then. But it has to link to your why. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and his Start With Why. You know, if it doesn't link to your why, then you're not going to find the time and the energy to really push on with it. So we've got to find time to explore these ideas. You don't need hours. Sometimes it can be a good constructive few minutes every single week. I mean, 1% of a working week is 20 minutes, right? You know, can we find that kind of time just to invest into an idea? Because that's what we did in 2011, 2012. You know, it was, you know, we had full-time jobs. We had other commitments, charity, sport commitments. We had to find nuggets of time just to think it through. And when you know in your heart of heart, this is an idea I have to explore, I've got a duty to myself, then you've just got to go do it.
Okay, so when you're working with clients and organizations, whose responsibility is it? Whose role is it to come up with ideas? Is it everybody? Is everybody equal? Does everybody have to be good at coming up with ideas?
Well, I passionately believe everybody can. I've yet to meet someone who doesn't have an imagination, who doesn't have ideas. But in the corporate space, there's a big misconception which we have to change, that innovation and ideas are 9 times out of 10 are very top down. But if you were to pick up everybody's CVs, Mira, and you looked at LinkedIn profiles, the vast majority of people will use words like I'm innovative, I'm determined, I'm ambitious, but it kind of gets squashed out of people when they join an organization. So I think the most successful leaders build, and business owners and CEOs build cultures where everybody's responsible. And you've got to define what you mean by an idea as well. It's not just the breakthrough ones, it's the little ones which can make a big, big difference. You take a school, for example, it might not just be the members on the senior leadership team in the head. It could be the receptionist, it could be the groundsman, it could be anybody in that environment will see ideas about how to improve it. So you've got to create that culture and make sure everybody feels empowered to share and to act on their ideas.
Okay, but you specifically talk about bottom-up innovation, which for me, and tell me if I've understood it correctly, means that it's the people dealing really with the customers rather than top-down, which you said earlier.
Yeah.
Why would you say bottom-up innovation is so important?
It's absolutely crucial. I mean, these people are on across your business, whether it's hundreds or thousands of members of staff. These people are helping you to deliver your services and to sell your services. They see the marginal gains which you do not always see. So it makes incredibly good business sense as well to get an environment where you have bottom-up innovation, because every single employee will be able to identify ideas of how we could be more efficient, so productivity, how potentially we could save money or be a bit smarter, how could we potentially bring in new revenue streams to the business. But they'll certainly be able to add to the 4th and 5th area that I talk about how do we improve employee satisfaction. So there's a better buzz in an organization, and how do we improve our service to our clients? So all ideas can be related to those 5 areas: productivity, revenue gains, cutting costs, employee satisfaction, and client satisfaction. And everybody in a business can contribute to innovation in those different areas.
And do you also encourage organizations to go outside of their business and ask their clients to help them with their ideas and innovation? How do you involve the customers in that?
Absolutely. It's brave and it should be done. You can't be a world-class business and you can't really push on unless you're hearing the feedback from the floor, right? So it's feedback internally and externally. So you've got to create ways of capturing it. What you've got to do, and one of the biggest challenges when you're brave enough to do it, is it's the moans, the nitty gritty. You're going to hear it, right? But you've got to be brave enough to take it on the chin, and you've got to listen, and you've got to adapt, and you've got to change it. But you've got to do it in a different way. When you are doing it internally, there are different things that you are looking for from your employees. When you're doing it externally, you've got to invite them into that ideation process in the correct way, so it's constructive. and you've got to pilot it and you've got to roll it out. If you've got 100 customers, you don't say on day one, we want to hear from all of you your ideas, because you're probably going to hear the same gripes. You're probably going to hear some of the same frustrations, but you could probably learn that from half a dozen of your loyal customers who you're inviting them in. You could deal with those, then you roll it out stage 2, stage 3, and you bring those people in with you. So you've got to start with your employees. You've then got to think about potentially with suppliers and key partners. And then you've got to really go to your customers, because by the time you get to your customers, you're probably going to make countless improvements, which means they're going to give you some really constructive feedback and ideas to improve on.
Okay, so I mean, I know you've worked with lots of organisations, and you must have come across either a culture in a country or a culture in an organisation where actually ideas aren't encouraged. So what do you do then? Or do you just say you walk away from it, or do you challenge them on that?
The truth is, we have to, when you want to change a culture and you want to get everybody adding up, you have to be able to look the leader and the CEO in the eyes and go, do you believe that your employees can add a significant amount of value to your organization? And I'm happy to say the vast majority do, but some people are scared. Some people don't want to open it up. Some people will feel like it's criticism on their part. And those people, quite frankly, you can't implement culture change campaigns into those organizations if the leadership are not going to back it. It has to be part and parcel of their vision. But what a vision! I mean, to me, it would be an absolute no-brainer that your legacy as a CEO and as a leader is literally saying, the big change I'm going to make in my tenure is that we're going to change the way that we innovate. It's not the responsibility of just the board. It's the responsibility of the 1 to 10,000 employees that work in my organization. And this is the way that we're going to do it, guys. That's very empowering, and it means that, rather than a couple of ideas or being worked on annually, you're talking about thousands of ideas being worked on. But if we can't look the leader in the eyes and see that they genuinely believe in it, there's no way that we can work with them. It just will not. You need that leader to be backing it, to be that common narrative for what we're saying within their organization. They need to be reinforcing it.
Okay, so here's the thing. Do you have any examples of organizations that do it really well, or leaders that do it really well? Can you share some initiatives or some brands that you think, yes, they get it right?
Yeah, pockets of it, and it ranges from the SME sector to the large organizations. It certainly isn't just has to be the big multinationals. I mean, any business can start to appreciate. So we see some environments with 50, 60, 70 users which are doing it incredibly well. I won't name the multinational, but there was one large hospitality company we did a big project with, who had 50,000 employees in the UK. And they wanted to change the culture that it was for everybody. And they were in hospitality, running a significant amount of canteens and kitchens in corporate and sporting venues across the UK, in fact, across the world. And they wanted to change it. They wanted it not just to be top down. They wanted to hear from everybody. And one of the stories goes, I remember that they were telling us about one of the ideas which made a big impact. They were running a hospitality site at a football stadium, and the average transaction time was taking about 96, 97 seconds. So somebody at the middle of the game would go for their hot dog and a cup of tea, but it was too long, right? The queues were too long, customers were complaining. And they said, right, guys, we're using a particular platform, and we're going to have a huddle, we're going to try and generate some ideas. And what came out of it in that particular environment was none of the staff actually knew each other's names. Because it was always temporary staff rolling. So they said, let's get name tags. So rather than sort of saying that mate or David, it was quicker, can you please pass me this? So they were saving fractions of seconds then. Also, the kitchen was just poorly organized. The tea and the milk was 10 meters apart. So when they were doing stuff, but nobody really said anything. And it had just been happening for years. They made those changes and it went from 96 seconds to less than a minute. So profoundly had a big impact on the amount of business that they would do in that half time. That's not going to come down from the CEO of that organization. That had to be a bottom-up idea from just a temporary member of staff. So we hear these ideas all the time, and one which I talk about because it's so important, and one that resonated with a lot of people. We just had a culture and environment in Asia. Really stuffy, hot environment, and one of our initiatives launched on day one, and about 300 members of staff in this organization, and a lady came forward and said her idea was we need to have a mother's room. And she said, I'm about to work breastfeeding mum. I'm 5 or 6 times a day going into cubicles to pump milk, and surely we can have just a small corner, a small area in the establishment that I can go and do this and go pump milk. And she posted it. What happened in that first 24 hours was 6 other women came forward and said they were doing the same thing. Worked out to be 2% of their working population. The leader of that organization had no idea that this was happening. It just was not on their radar. It wasn't deliberately not on their radar. It just wasn't on their radar, and just said that was unacceptable. Straight away, a room was built, and those ladies could go utilize that room. So for that 2% of that working population, it made a big difference to their working day. It had a big positive impact, because it started having that impact on other employees, that suddenly we now work for an organization which is listening, and it empowered them. So these are just very very simple and small examples which we see on a day-to-day basis in our environments.
Lovely. And actually it strikes me that it's not only about ideas, it's about getting the communication in place, isn't it? So that you can communicate better. No wonder it increases engagement. Obviously it will do. It's great. I love it. So tell me, David, because I mean, we could go on forever. So I want to sort of talk about the speaking element of your work. When a client invites you in to speak, what are they hoping to get from you from a speech? Because, I mean, in this amount of time, we've barely scraped the surface. What can you give them that they can take away in a keynote speech from you?
Well, I feel very lucky and privileged to work across 2 fantastic sectors, and by doing that, we've learned a lot. So, working in the education space, working with students from reception up until 18 in every learning environment, so academies, private schools, internationally across the world, but also in the young offenders space. And talking about entrepreneurship, we have learned so much about how amazing children are and how their imaginations operate. But then also working in the corporate space, and what we've learned about how the vast majority of cultures are, we've picked up that innovation isn't done as well as it should done. So but there's a lot of crossover, and there's a lot we can learn from both of those different industries. So I've been very lucky to talk about a number of key topics. One being what can businesses learn from children? Which is a topic I love talking about, because we've got countless examples. And if we can just embrace the imagination of a child, the fearless imagination of a child, and take that into our businesses, it can have a profound impact. And one area I'm talking more and more about is about how organizations can embrace a world-class mentality. Those 2 words, world-class, I've been fascinated with for a couple of decades now, and about how elite people operate. Elite people don't just exist on the sporting field or in the boardroom. Elite people exist in every walk of life. But how can you get that kind of culture? How can you get everybody realizing that they have something to add to an environment, and beginning to think about, can we build a world-class business, or can we build a world-class school, or can we build a world-class whatever it might be? So it's a fascinating topic. But again, I draw on a lot of our lessons in education as well, about what we can learn from children. So those 2 key topics I think are very relevant. And also very interesting for keynote talks and for conferences, because people can relate to it. Everybody went to school. People are lucky enough to have children. They'll be able to relate to lots of things that we're talking about. And also people, when we, in terms of that first topic about what we can learn, what businesses can learn from children, but in terms of that second topic about that world-class mentality, I mean, who wouldn't want that? Who would not want to bring that into their working life in any small capacity, and it will have a big impact.
Fantastic, brilliant, love both those titles, really great, really strong. So finally, I always put my speakers into a time machine, and you're still quite young, so I don't want to take you too far, but I want to take you back when you started speaking at conferences and events for schools, for businesses, and started to deliver. Now you know what you know, and you have the experience that you have. What advice would you give David, who was starting out as a speaker now?
I remember doing one of my, it wasn't as a speaker, but one of my first presentations when I was kind of put on the spot, and it didn't go as well as I wanted to, a good period of time. And I just said to myself, I'm never going to be like that again. There is a lot you can control. At the end of the day, a good presentation or keynote has a start, has a middle, and has an end. and it's a loud conversation. That's all it is. I mean, I'm fascinated about the fact that people are more scared about speaking than dying in the UK, which is an extraordinary statistic. But I just simplify the whole process. You've got to have a start, you've got to have a middle and the end, and you can control a lot more than you can imagine. You can control what you're wearing, which can make you feel confident. You can control what you're eating and what you're drinking beforehand, which can look after your voice. You can definitely control the technology and making sure you don't have any blips as you start, because that can put people off. So you can think about all of those things that you can control to make sure that when you're on stage that you're as comfortable as you possibly can. And I remember my dad gave me a good tip, because I come from a sort of Irish family with my grandparents are very reserved and very quiet. And 5 minutes before my auntie got married, my granny tapped my dad on the shoulder and said, "By the way, you're giving the father of the bride speech." And my granddad wasn't going to do it. He was very quiet. And my dad was like, "Are you joking? There's 100 people in this room, and you're giving me 5 minutes to prepare for it." And he just said, he just said to me, every speech has a start, middle, and end. He went up into the reception, found a piece of paper, and thought, how am I going to start this? What's going to be the main bit, and what's going to be the message that people are going to be taking away? And I remember him telling that very, very early on, and that's kind of stuck with me. So so you can get ready quite quickly, but if you've got a little bit of time, just remember you can control a lot more than you can imagine.
I love that. That's brilliant. What a great place to end. Thank you so much, David.
Don't be silly. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope everybody has a fantastic day.